You knew him by what he did. He fixed the leak under the sink at 11 o'clock at night. He drove to work before the sun came up and came home after it went down. He handed your mother an envelope on Friday and never once told you what it cost him to fill it. You knew him by his routine. The same chair. The same game on TV he wasn't really watching. The same, "I'm fine," said the way he said, "pass the salt," flat, final, like the question itself was an intrusion. You grew up in a house where everything was provided. The light stayed on. The food was on the table. The roof never leaked twice. But there was something missing from that house. And it took you 20 years to realize what it was. It was him. Not his body. Not his labor. Him. The version of himself he locked away so completely, you started to wonder if it ever existed at all. And if your father wasn't there, if he left, or was taken, or simply never showed up, then you know this feeling too. Not the silence of a man in the next room, but the silence of an empty chair. Absence has a shape. And kids learn that shape by heart. And there's a moment most of us remember, 3 seconds long, when that silence cracked. Stay with me. We're going to come back to it. This is the story of the silent provider. Not a villain. Not a hero. Something harder to understand than either, a man who believed the greatest act of love was to carry everything alone, and never let you see him struggle. The breadwinner model didn't just ask men to earn money. It asked them to become money. To convert identity into function. To measure worth not by what they felt, but by what they produced. And somewhere inside the conversion, something got traded. Your father didn't wake up one morning and decide to be emotionally unavailable. He was trained. By a culture that taught him pain equals failure. By an economy that treats a man as replaceable the moment he stops producing. And by a generation before him that survived things so brutal that silence wasn't a preference. It was the only tool that worked. So he picked up that tool. And he used it every day. There's a concept in psychology called normative male alexithymia, first described by psychologist Ronald Levant. It's not a clinical diagnosis. It's a pattern, quiet enough to go unnoticed. Destructive enough to shape a whole family. It describes men who feel the full range of emotion, but often lack the vocabulary, the practice, or the permission to name it out loud. Your father may have had entire emotional landscapes inside him, grief, terror, loneliness, regret. And when the moment came to speak, he didn't know how to translate any of it into words. So the silence wasn't empty. It was full. And if you're honest, you can probably remember the moment that proved it. Not a conversation. Your father didn't have those. A moment. A fracture, 3 seconds long. That rearranged everything you thought you knew. Maybe it was the time you walked into the garage and he was just sitting there. Engine off. Staring at nothing. And when he noticed you, he rearranged his face so fast. It was like watching a man put on a mask in real time. Maybe it was a funeral. Someone you didn't know well enough to cry for. But he cried, just for a second. Just enough to scare you, because you didn't know he could. Or maybe it was the night you heard him through the wall. Not words. Just sound. The sound a man makes when he believes no one is listening. Those moments matter. Because they tell you the truth. The silence was never natural. It was constructed. Maintained. Defended, almost like a religion. Your father worked harder at hiding his pain than most people work at anything in their lives. And those fractures, they were the only honest windows you ever got into who he really was. Hold on to them. Not with anger. Not with pity. With the knowledge that those moments were the closest he could come to telling you the truth. To know where his silence came from, you have to go back one generation. Sometimes that war was literal: World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Sometimes it was the Great Depression. Sometimes it was poverty, violence, addiction, and a home where tenderness was considered dangerous. These were men forged in furnaces most of us can't imagine. They came home carrying shrapnel that didn't show up on X-rays, and they were told to get on with it. The diagnosis we now call PTSD didn't enter the DSM until 1980. Before that, there were other names: shell shock, battle fatigue, war neurosis. But not a common language that opened the door to real care without shame. So they built armor. Out of routine. Out of discipline. Out of a stoicism that looked, from the outside, like strength. And then they taught their sons to wear that same armor. Not with words. Words were the enemy. They taught it through what they never said. Through questions they never answered. Through the doors they closed behind them. Your father learned, watching his father, that a man handles things alone. That vulnerability is a liability. That the family needs a wall, and he is that wall. And walls do not get to have feelings. This wasn't cruelty. It was curriculum. So what happens to a child raised inside the curriculum? Some children become detectives. They learn to read micro-expressions. The tightness in his jaw. The way he leaves the room when a certain psalm comes on. The way he drinks one beer slowly on most nights, but finishes 3 without speaking on others. They become hypervigilant translators of a language that was never meant to be decoded. Other children become replicas. They absorb the silence and call it strength. They become their fathers, faithfully, without ever deciding to. And some children become the opposite. They reject the silence so violently they swing into oversharing, overfeeling. Like an emotional flood with no training, no regulation, no map. Because the absence of a model can shake you just as powerfully as the presence of a broken one. And here's the part most people miss. The silence doesn't just disappear when you grow up. It turns into something specific, something you can actually recognize and name inside your own home. I want to name something you already know, but maybe never had words for. I'm going to call it silent architecture. It's not a clinical term. It's just the closest language I have for something that lives in a lot of homes. It's the emotional blueprint of a place where everything is structurally sound, but emotionally hollow. The bills are paid. The lawn is mowed. The kids are fed. But there's no map to the interior life of the man holding it all together. The hallways are clean. And every door is closed. You lived in that architecture. You learned the floor plan. You learned which rooms were safe. And which topics made the air change. And here's what nobody told you when you were 7 years old. Trying to understand why your father always looked tired. It was never about you. His distance was not a judgment of your worth. His silence was not a rejection of your love. He was drowning, quietly, methodically. The way a man drowns when he believes asking for a life raft would make him less of a man. And the cruelest part is that he thought he was protecting you. He believed his silence was a gift. That by keeping the darkness on his side of the door, he was giving you light. He was wrong. But he was wrong for the most human reason there is. He was wrong because he loved you. And there's one more layer, one we should handle carefully. There's growing research in epigenetics exploring how severe, prolonged stress might leave marks on the body's stress response. and how some of those patterns may echo across generations. The science is still developing. It's debated. It's not a neat headline, but the direction it points is unsettling. Your father's silence may have shaped more than your memories. It may have shaped the way your body learned to brace for danger. So where does that leave us? Standing at the end of a long hallway, holding a key our fathers never knew existed. The key is not therapy, though therapy helps. It is not forgiveness, though forgiveness matters. The key is vocabulary. Our fathers were emotionally capable men trapped inside an emotionally illiterate culture. And you cannot speak a language you were never allowed to learn. This is not about blaming them. The man who worked doubles so you could go to college does not deserve your contempt. The man who never said, "I love you," but showed up to every game, does not deserve your diagnosis from across a Thanksgiving table. He deserves your understanding. But understanding is not the end. It's the foundation. And here's the part that isn't poetic, and isn't clean. Breaking the cycle doesn't happen because you watched this video and felt something. It happens in the repetitive, unglamorous work of catching yourself mid-silence and choosing, again, to speak. It happens the 43rd time, not the first. It happens when you're tired and it would be easier to say, "I'm fine." It happens when you sit across from your son or your daughter and say the sentence your father couldn't say. "I'm struggling right now. And I want you to know it's okay to struggle." It won't feel like strength when you say it. It will feel like falling. But your children will remember it the way you remember your father's silence. Except what they carry forward won't be a wound. It will be a door. Your father built a house. He built it strong. He built it quiet. And he built it with hands that never stopped working. And a heart that never stopped hurting. You can't go back and open every door he kept closed. You can't give him the words he never had. But you can take the blueprint he left you and add the rooms he was too afraid to build. The room where men are allowed to break. The room where sons are allowed to ask. The room where fathers are allowed to answer. And the room where the silence, finally, is allowed to end. Not because he failed you, but because he gave you just enough to find what he couldn't.